Welcome to the morning plenary. My name is David Wright. I'm a professor of nursing at the University of Ottawa in Canada. I'm also a member of the Scientific Planning Committee of this Congress. Welcome to the public face of palliative care.
Good morning. My name is Zelda Freitas. I'm a clinical senior advisor here in Montreal in one of our healthcare networks, the CIUS West Central Montreal, and also an adjunct professor at the School of Social Work at McGill University, as well as a member of the scientific committee. Welcome everybody this morning. I will go ahead.
Yeah, we have some conflict of interest business to attend to.
The CME sign-in desk is located in the main lobby. Participants must sign in daily to obtain credit, as well as complete online evaluation forms on the app for each session they attend. Certificates of attendance will be emailed after the Congress. Scientific Planning Committee, there are a few members that have disclosures. Co-chair Bernard Lapointe, member of an advisory board or similar committee, Pallium Project ECHO. Member Linda Krellenstein, nurse, Grant Honoraria, Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons. Member Vincent Dagnier-Boulet, pharmacist, Grant HLS Conference and Otsuka Ludbeck Conference. Member of an advisory board or similar committee. Otsuka Ludbeck, Member Suzanne O'Brien, social worker, Grant Research Support, Hope and Cope. The other members of the scientific committee do not have any conflict or have no declaration of a conflict of interest. Just want to mention that the Congress has received educational grants and in-kind support from the companies listed on the slide. These are some of the learning objectives of the overall Congress, and this is an additional learning objectives of the Congress. I would like now to introduce the reflection. Shifting Perspectives Awareness, created by Elisa Bistonath. Elisa Bistonath is a filmmaker and photographer living in Toronto. She focuses on themes of memory and belonging. Elisa Bistonath is the daughter of Guyanese immigrants, endeavors to look at modes of representation by investigating nostalgia, exploring evidence, and interrupting the archive. Most recently, she was featured in the Art Gallery of Ontario's Art in the Spotlight and in the Canadian Art for her series Isolation Photographs. Her work includes Portals, a video installation commissioned by the City of Toronto for Nuit Blanche, and the documentary Why We Fight, which won the Best Canadian Short at the Regent Park Film Festival. Bistonath has her Master's of Fine Arts and teaches at Ryerson University. Reflection 2.
So for the plenary this morning, we're going to have 3 presentations and then a moderated panel discussion. So it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker and moderator of that discussion, Dr. Ira Byock. Dr. Ira Byock is a palliative care physician, author, and public advocate for improving care for people through the end of life. He is active emeritus professor at Dartmouth Geisel School of Medicine. Dr. Byock is founder of the Institute for Human Caring at Providence, a multi-state U.S. healthcare system. The Institute's Hear Me Now podcast explores critical social, ethical, and clinical issues related to health and healthcare. Dr. Byock's essays have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal, and he has been interviewed on CBS 60 Minutes, PBS NewsHour, and National Public Radio. His books include Dying Well, The 4 Things That Matter Most, a book about living, and the best care possible.
I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Hsien Seow and Dr. Samantha Winemaker. Palliative care physicians, Dr. Hsien Seow and Dr. Samantha Winemaker co-host The Waiting Room Revolution, a novel and a popular podcast that explores health and experiences with healthcare. Dr. Seow is the Canada Research Chair in Palliative Care and Health System Innovation and an Associate Professor in the Department of Oncology at McMaster University. He publishes healthcare and policy research focused on improving care for patients with serious illness. Dr. Winemaker is an Associate Clinical Professor, Department of Family Medicine in the Division of Palliative Care at McMaster University. She teaches palliative care to healthcare professionals.
And finally, Teresa Brown. Teresa Brown is author of the New York Times bestseller, The Shift, 1 Nurse, 12 Hours, 4 Patients' Lives. Most recently, she is author of Healing When a Nurse Becomes a Patient. She is a frequent contributor to the New York Times, CNN.com, and the American Journal of Nursing, and has been interviewed extensively on radio and television. She has a PhD in English from the University of Chicago, and inspired by her kids, left academia to become a nurse. So thank you all to the 4 of you, and if we could, perfect. Thank you, welcome.
Thank you very much. Bonjour, welcome. It is such a privilege and pleasure to be among you this morning, to be speaking again at this remarkable international congress. I have also had the privilege of hosting and convening my wonderful co-faculty here for this panel. It is just a privilege and pleasure to be with you. We have good work to do in the next hour or so. It is the intention of this presentation to be provocative. We want to be evocative in the most constructive, respectful, collegial manner, because we're going to talk about issues that I've come to understand all of us have really strong feelings about, but are rarely discussed in a structured manner. So the purpose today is to surface those issues and perhaps discuss them in a way that maybe moves us forward. If we are successful this morning, we will be stimulating lively conversations, perhaps even heated disagreements, both during this session, but also beyond, during the afternoon and the evening, and perhaps over strong drink and good food. I want us all to just simply remember that, that we should be respectful in our disagreements and our lively conversations. We are all colleagues here. Nous sommes amis. So, let us begin. I have no conflicts of interest, but I serve on many boards as a volunteer. I want to, beyond merely looking at our objectives here, which you can look at later, I want to read as a kind of a prequel the questions that we'll be talking about during the panel, the 4 questions. This is not Passover, but the 4 questions are important. First, and I've asked the panelists to address these in our presentations, as I will, but more so in the interactions that follow. All of us write or speak to the general public, in addition to our clinical or research roles. So the questions I've posed are, what do you want your audiences to think about and feel about palliative care? Not the facts that you want them to know, but rather what impression do you wish to impart in your public-facing efforts? What is our brand in palliative care? Does our field have a brand? Should we? Should we let go of the term palliative care? And if so, what name should we choose? And lastly, should we avoid associating palliative care with hospice and with dying? To be continued. I'll start with Confucius, who over 2,000 years ago said, I wasn't there, but I'm told that he said, the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. Indeed, words convey information, but they also reflect our own understanding. In this case, our understanding of who we are, what we do. And they can either expand or constrain us in the words that we choose. Now, the roots of our field, I believe, can be traced back to, well, to several things, but part of it to this book, Ernst Becker's book, The Denial of Death. It is part of the cultural environment to which our founders responded in constructive ways. We know that, what happened there? We skipped one. We know that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote eloquently in the 1960s, said, we need to teach the new generation of children from day one that they are responsible for their lives. Mankind's greatest gift, also its greatest curse, is that we have free choice. We can make our choices built from love or from fear. We could spend an hour just on that quote. This notion that our choices come out of either love or fear is really a central theme in how I understand how, well, I and many of us move through the world. In one sense, all of our choices come down to this one. Dame Cicely reminded us, you matter because you are. You matter to the last moment of your life. And we will do all that we can, not only to help you die peacefully, but also to live until you die. Notice that in her observation and her assertion, she used the word die twice. Daniel Callahan said, although medical training in the provision of care at the end of life has certainly improved, it is far from satisfactory. Death is still denied, evaded, and in the case of many clinicians, fought to the end, regardless of the patient's wishes. The new prominence of palliative care is a powerful antidote to this pattern, representing both a return to older traditions of care and a fresh, less troubled response to death. Notice that he rooted what we're doing, not just in our clinical work, but also in a cultural response to denial. and the cultural trouble we have with death. Words have power, and I want to focus our attention on the cultural aspects of the words that we choose in everyday life, in everyday practice, and in our conversations, but then also more directly in how we intentionally address the general public. So, for your consideration, in the words that I choose when I speak or when I write, I have come to avoid terms like the sick or the dying, rather instead deliberately choosing phrases sick people, or people who are sick, or dying people. Now, they're both categorical, but somehow it seems to my ears that the sick and the dying feel more objectifying. They distance us from the category of people who are not us. They're the dying. I am very careful to choose to say we provide care through the end of life, not at the end of life. Because if I come to a patient and say, I'm here from the palliative care team, and we provide the best care possible at the end of life, it's likely that the person will say, well, nice to meet you, we will call you when we get there. But we're not there yet. If I come and say we provide the best care possible through the end of life, they're likely to say, well, that sounds great, let's start now. It's a big change. I have avoided the terms in my own writing and speaking of end-of-life care unless we're talking retrospectively to what has happened. I don't know when we're at the end of life, really. We provide care through the end of life. And then, because I have a number of friends who are evangelicals, I have often chosen to say we provide care through the end of this life. Because it turns out that years ago I learned that when I was talking about care at the end of life, or when I even began saying through the end of life, they called me aside later and said, you know, Ira, this life ends, but we go to another life. And that was a barrier for them to open their minds and hearts to what I was trying to convey. Couple more. Lastly, I avoid saying the word death when I really mean dying. Because although it's grammatically correct to say the word death for a transition from life to lifeless, in the main, death is a lifeless state. I know nothing about it, never been there. Dying is a part of living. And while I've never been critically ill, I know a little bit about dying because, like so many of you, I hang out with people who are dying and have often asked them to share with me their perspectives. And lastly, for this little section, I have avoided the term good death because, again, death to my ears is a lifeless state, and I don't know what's good or bad. I use the term dying well, not only as an adverb, that word well, modifying the process of dying, but as an adjective, well, describing the person who is dying as well. Can you be well within yourself during the period of time that you're dying? Now, I set this up just as an introduction because I want to talk about some controversy within our field. There's been marketing research done about how we should introduce ourselves to others, and marketing research has its value. It's research, but it's kind of pretty soft research. It's done to sell products or to communicate. It can help you to distill key messages and talking points and taglines and brands. But caution is important because you only learn from marketing research about exactly the phrases that you choose. And the context and the framing of the items that you give people can change the results dramatically. It also is quite prone to unconscious biases that may be reinforced by the way the statements are posed to participants in surveys or focus groups and the like, and the results may be highly influenced by pre-existing biases, attitudes, and past experiences or assumptions of both the researchers and the test audience. Now, I'm going to distill information and slides from the Center to Advance Palliative Care's research into terminology from 2 webinars, and there's a paper here as well, and we're going to have to go very quickly here. But first, they asked about whether palliative care is even recognized, and just look at the bottom row here, and even in 2019 when this was done, not many people even recognized, oops, did I skip a slide here? Well, not many people recognized palliative care. It was a little bit more recognizable among patients and caregivers who are able to rate it. But if you look at the middle section, the top box rating is still pretty low. 19% of people ages 25 or so, 21% of those older, and then patients and caregivers a little bit higher. They asked, what terms should we use? Should we use serious illness or advanced illness in describing what we do? But they predicated this on the assumption, which is probably a correct assumption, that that terminal illness was to be avoided in our conversations. So when you hear the phrase serious advanced illness, do you think this generally is the same meaning as terminal illness? And they said, well, serious illness tests better, which it does. So their recommendations were to talk about palliative care in messaging that is less, or more acceptable or less offensive to people. We should talk about providing the best quality of life, relieving symptoms, pain, stress, that it's appropriate at any age, along with curative treatment, concurrent care. Matching treatment options to patients' goals, a team approach, an extra layer of support, all great. They say what to do, thumbs up. Palliative care is a specialized medical care for people living with serious illness. It focuses on providing patients with relief from symptoms and stress, and the goal is to improve quality of life for the patient and family. Message discipline is important, and I agree with that principle, but they're saying that we must be sure to avoid saying that palliative care is related to hospice. Palliative care is not the same as hospice. What people remember is the term palliative care and hospice, even though you've said the opposite. Actually, you should say palliative care helps patients have the best possible quality of life. Then palliative care is associated with the best possible quality of life. The things that we should not do, see the stop sign there, are things like this. Palliative care is a specialty that focuses on improving quality of life for someone suffering with a serious or life-altering illness. Hospice care falls under the same umbrella, but that is specifically to deal with people who are dying. Don't say that, because we're associating palliative care with hospice. Similarly, palliative care goes beyond end-of-life care, still gets you into that proximity bubble, and people associate palliative care with end-of-life care. Same with terminal cases, with end-of-life hospice. Regardless of how long they are expected to live, it's the right message, but said in the wrong way. The takeaway that people get is that palliative care equals end-of-life care and hospice. They go further, and to say they used as an example of something not to do the brilliant, in my estimation, article that our plenary speaker from last evening, Dr. Sunita Puri, published in the New York Times, The Lesson of Impermanence. And they call out, this is CAPC's slide, as a palliative care doctor, I spend much of my time face-to-face with pain and suffering, debilitating disease, and death. I have to say, this is one of the things that really brought me to alertness and said, from my perspective, any time a palliative care doctor lands an opinion piece in the New York Times is a very good thing. It's not a bad thing. We should stop using images like this, people holding hands at a bedside. Now, I come here with some humility, though it may not seem like it. But I am a serial offender. I have been using the terms for years, including at this Congress, International Congress on Care for the Terminally Ill. I'm actively involved in a number of organizations that are promoting an integration of illness and caregiving and dying and grieving within the cultural milieu, within our active culture. And so I just want to call attention to that this marketing research is not particle physics. This is not hard science. And that marketing research can improve how we say things, how we deliver a message, but it will not tell you what to say. And much like political campaigns, we need to be concerned about using marketing research and focus groups to determine what we say to our constituents. We come together here as a palliative care community to lead public attitudes, social change, and cultural maturation. This controversy, if you will, calls attention to what we should be talking about in our organizations, many of which have palliative care and hospice in our names. Now, I realize that what we're trying to do is see as many patients as early as we can. And I'm very aware of Dr. Barrera's and his colleagues' use of the term supportive care and how that has expanded access to palliative care or supportive care in some very challenging circumstances. I would only say that instead of changing our names, we could change the meaning that our name represents to others. This is what we did at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center at the Dartmouth campus years ago. We changed the meaning of palliative care. There was an early morning, about 6:30 one morning, when I was walking down back stairways at Dartmouth to the GI tumor board, which convened at 6:30, and I was halfway down the stairs and walking with an oncology friend who looked up at me and said, "Ira, you know, I got to tell you, 3 years ago when you came, I thought the last thing we need is yet another specialty around here, and we're doing just fine, and my gosh, but at this point, I can't remember how we used to take care of these patients without you." And then he walked a few more steps, and then he looked back and said, "But could you change your name? I mean, when I say palliative care to my patients, it scares the daylights out of them." And he took another couple of steps. I said, "Excuse me, Mark, could we just pause here? This is really ironic because, you know, we're having this conversation in the midst of the cancer center. You want to know what scares the daylights out of people? Just having a doctor say the word cancer to their patients." So, Mark, when you change the name of the cancer center to like the Little Bump Center, we can call ourselves the Rainbow Program if you like, but I got to tell you, it's more important to change what we do, because if all we do is care for people at the end of life, if that's when you send patients to the Rainbow Program, within 2 years you will be asking me to see this patient and family, but please don't mention rainbows when you go in the room. Right? We have to change the meaning. I want to show a very brief video from Jared Rubenstein, our colleague from Texas. Can we run that? Can I run that? There it is.
I don't want you to be scared, but I'd like to consult palliative care to see you. Why would I be scared? It's just that I know palliative care gets a bad reputation sometimes. Why do they have a bad reputation? It's not that, it's just, you know. What's palliative care? Well, a palliative care team is an interdisciplinary group of people that can help be an extra layer of support for patients and families dealing with serious illness. They think of the patient as a whole person and can help with physical, emotional, and spiritual distress. They help prioritize quality of life and can assist with planning for the future. That sounds amazing. Why would I be scared of them? Well, I'm not scared. Are you?
So, I just want to ask, who's in denial now? I think we need to be careful about becoming the purveyor of cultural denial of dying and death in the contemporary world. As I close, I just want to ask, what are we really for? I believe we begin by addressing symptoms and suffering. We alleviate symptoms and suffering. That's our first priority, but it's not our ultimate goals. If we had longer and in other conversations, I would talk about this hierarchy of human caring, which I sketched out early in the pandemic to try to make sense to my own mind about what we can do and how we should order and prioritize our interventions. And this, with great respect and appreciation from psychologist Abe Maslow, is sort of a hierarchy of all that we can contribute within the community of healthcare to our patients. And let me just close by saying that from my perspective, well, I should say this comes from IMHO, which of course stands for the International Medical Humanities Organization, or in my humble opinion. Our brand is simply that we provide the best care possible through the end of life to help people live fully and die well. We are about well-being through the end of life. Leadership, cultural leadership comes from many sources. This is singer-songwriter Graham Nash, who observed, "Life is not perfect, it never will be. You just have to make the very best of it, and you have to open your heart to what the world can show you. Sometimes it's terrifying, and sometimes it's incredibly beautiful." He, in this phrase, is helping us grow the rest of the way up. And I'll leave you with this further quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, in talking about what we can do for our children, our role culturally, children who've been exposed to these kinds of experiences in a safe, secure, and loving environment will then raise another generation of children who will most likely not understand why there was this overwhelming fear of death, which for so long covered up the fear of living. Thank you, and I'll introduce Dr. Hsien Seow and Sammy Winemaker.
Yeah, I think they'll pull up the slides and we'll
Can we
keep
change the slide deck?
We'll get there. This way. It's okay. We can just... Yeah,
I don't see our slides up there.
right there. But they're not up there. Oh, it'll come up. All right. Well, you can start.
Oh. Hi, I'm Dr. Hsien Seow, and this is, just kidding. We've morphed into one person, and I liked his bio better than mine, so anyway, hello, good morning. We are so honored to be here today at the plenary. Dr. Hsien Seow is a researcher in palliative care, as you heard, and I'm a palliative care physician working in people's homes. And we're excited to weigh in and lean into this conversation about palliative care, our name, our brand. Do we need rebranding? I don't know. What I do know is that many of our healthcare colleagues see palliative care, the specialty and the service, as a convenient off-ramp when there's nothing more they can do for their patients. And it's no wonder to me that patients equate the word palliative with end of life and dying. It is used often as a label at a point in time, usually very late in the illness trajectory. And for many people, it feels like a new diagnosis. You're palliative. I've been working in palliative care for 18 years in people's homes. And at the beginning, I felt like I was on a drug. It was such a high. I felt like a hero. There was no better feeling. I'm sure you have all felt that. When other people could say, "There's nothing more I can do for you," I would say hi and lean in and say, "What can I do for you?" It felt incredible. I wanted more of it and more of it. But at some point early in my career, I started feeling like something's not right. It feels darker to me. I wonder often if I'm part of a bigger problem. Patients come my way after being on a long healthcare journey where they are deconstructed and reduced to a diagnosis, body parts, a number, a bed. And when I catch them, I stitch them back together. I make them whole again and make them feel like a person just before they die. And so I started feeling like I'm part of unintentional cleanup crew, that I'm supposed to make everything look good after it had been so bad. And I started feeling guilty that I was part of that, and it no longer felt like I was being heroic, even though I still love the care. So I drank the Kool-Aid. He just reminded me, you drank the Kool-Aid. I drank the Kool-Aid, and so did he. I focused on education. I said, this is never going to be about a palliative care specialty only. We're not going to be able to solve this problem of all the people coming our way, like lifeguards plucking them out of the water one by one. That the only way we're going to do this is if we sell this to the rest of the healthcare system as a palliative approach, and that we need to make sure that they understand that it needs to be a natural infused part of their skill set that they can pepper into the entire illness journey from the beginning. I was all about that, and I spent years trying to do that. And you know what happened? It didn't change fast enough. And even on Monday, when I saw a new patient consult, she was a woman in her 60s, and she had stage 4 cancer and very advanced COPD. And she looked at me, and she said, "Why am I so tired?" I thought to myself, really? Wow. How many healthcare teams have you had touch points with before today? I didn't say that. I thought it. And again, I thought, the dial is not moving fast enough.
So I'm a researcher, like many of you, and I was motivated to this field of palliative care because my mother died of breast cancer when I was 10. And I can tell you, in that journey, it lasted 4 years of ups and downs. The entire time, we were in the dark. We didn't know what to expect. We just kept thinking if she fought harder, she would get better, even though it had metastasized to her lungs and her bones. We just kept thinking if we just rallied around her, she would come home from the hospital, until one day she didn't. So as a researcher, my career has been focused on, maybe it's not a branding issue, maybe it's an evidence issue. And I have been working with many of you trying to develop the evidence that an early palliative care approach has patient benefits, has health system benefits, and we have been bringing that evidence to policymakers and to healthcare providers to help them to change their behavior, thinking if they had the evidence, they would implement an early palliative care approach. But we have a mountain of evidence. In fact, it helps people live longer, we have shown. But we are questioning. I still hear patients say to me when I do interviews, I wish I had known that sooner. I don't know, what to expect. And it's been 30 years. So the dial isn't moving fast enough. So that's how we got together, because to be completely honest, we were frustrated and we hit a wall. We're like, what can be done? Can anything be done? I think we should give up. Let's go to Florida, open an event planning.
No, I was going into real estate. You were event planning.
But we jokes aside, we were like, what can be done? And this was our big idea. We realized that we have spent years, decades, focusing our education on policymakers and healthcare providers, and we had missed a huge opportunity, was bringing the knowledge that we have to patients and families directly. They deserve the information, they want the information, and so I think what we're bringing to this plenary is we have gone public-facing. We thought actually it would be relatively easy to do this, but we learned a lot in the last few years going public, and we want to share that with you.
Okay, so we're going to share 3 important lessons that we learned when we were trying to test out the waters in the public sphere. So this is our palliative care truck, our dog and pony show, and we thought, okay, while you guys are all teaching healthcare providers, we're going to take our truck, our end-of-life care truck, and we're going to drive it upstream. And we're going to try to sell palliative care to patients and families at the beginning of their diagnosis. And we did not have a lineup. We realized that people most of my experience has been in end-of-life care. That's how I was trained, in end-of-life care, even though I philosophically want and dream about working more upstream. That's my experience. And so we thought, okay, well, we'll just do that earlier on and see how that goes. But people earlier on are not in the same frame of mind. Their readiness is not the same in the beginning and the middle of their illness as when we see them. So it wasn't going to work, just driving upstream. They didn't want what we had to sell. So Hsien and I took all of his research and all the patient stories that we had listened to and deconstructed, and we began to realize that there were themes that bubbled up. And one of them was that language is really important to the public, especially early on in a diagnosis, and that the language we use has to be palatable. And they wanted it to be hopeful. And they wanted a palliative approach. They want what we have to offer. They just don't want it looking like that. And so what we did had to be nuanced. The language had to be hopeful and positive. We realized the third thing was that people were looking for a roadmap, even at the beginning, some navigation, coordination. They wanted something they could sink their teeth into. But we also knew that we had to address the natural landmines or the potholes or the natural disasters of the healthcare system, because we can give them a roadmap, but if they step foot on that conveyor belt and they're met with all of this healthcare cultural stuff, we're not going to get far. For an example of that would be our culture of toxic positivity. You know, we had to address that in our work. Mrs. Smith, you look so good today. I know this is your 7th time out of the ICU, but your cheeks are pink today, and your Angora sweater looks gorgeous on you, and you can do it, rah, rah, rah. We're amazing cheerleaders in healthcare, all of us, and our intentions are good. But it is a roadblock for people accessing honest, open, realistic, truthful, helpful information along their journey.
So what we've been talking about is, in some ways, we reverse engineered a palliative approach to patients and families, what that would look like without the labels. We had to think of new metaphors or new language, and this roadmap of action. So I want to be very concrete. This is what we came up with. It took us many years, but the 7 keys to unlock a better illness experience. I don't have time to go through them all, but I'll give you a few examples. The first one is probably the most important. It's the idea of walking 2 roads. The assumption that fallen tree on the road is that many patients and families, and maybe healthcare providers, feel that they can only walk the road of hope with their patients, and if they aren't overly positive, they're giving up. They're giving up the battle. So even in family discussions, people want to avoid planning too far ahead because it will feel like we're not being as positive as we can be. But planning ahead, thinking about the rest, does not betray hope. Hope evolves. So the key action is to walk 2 roads, which means hope for the best and plan for the rest. Another example is this idea of zooming out. Patients and families often get lost in the weeds, at the clinical appointments. They're focused on the next treatment decision, what do I do next? But they have lost the big picture of their illness, the bird's eye view of where they are in their illness story. Are they in the beginning, the middle, the late, or the end of life stage? And having that context is what will allow them to make good decisions that fit them. So we help them to zoom out, which is to understand the storyline of their illness, which is something different than the timeline. So at first glance, this is not rocket science. This audience especially can identify this is kind of what palliative care does. Customize your order, it overlaps with advanced care planning, ripple effects is about treating the family as well. I mean, these are the things, but what we learned is this language can be hopeful. This language are metaphors that not only patients and families can ask for, but healthcare providers can invite people to the conversation. So we had this idea, we worked with patients and families to get it right, but how do we get it into the hands of the people who need it? Because again, we could not be the only people who are promoting it. So we needed patients and families to demand it. That was sort of our U-turn. So we needed a social movement. A social movement is a group of people who come together for a common purpose. Things like Black Lives Matter, March for Our Lives, Occupy Wall Street, Me Too. People come together, they own it, they decide where the direction goes. We called the social movement the waiting room revolution. We wanted patients and families to come together to demand a better healthcare experience, patient-centered care, but this was the operationalizing how they do it. We didn't know how to get it out, and so what we do is we kept talking to each other. We're like, let's record it. We started a podcast, season 1, and if you check it out, it talks about the 7 keys, but it's really us, in some ways, talking to ourselves and getting our ideas out. But we had no idea that anyone else would listen to us when we were in our closets, like recording. We have pictures of this. But we are now in our 5th season. We're in the top 2% of global podcasts, and we meet wonderful people all the time, and it's been a fun experience. We have been on social media. You'll see before we launched the podcast, we were not, but we have been on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Sammy's on those. You'll see it's her face, not mine. She's amazing. They're all different. But these are all examples of us interacting with the public. And another sign is we've been picked up by a publisher, and we have a book coming out, Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest. The key is, and it comes out next year, but the key is the title is not How to Die Well or What to Expect When You're Dying. It's Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest, 7 keys for navigating a life-changing diagnosis. I think our key is that we were really recognizing the whole journey is life-changing, and we don't only want great patient-centered care when we know we're dying the last year of life or at end of life, the last weeks and months. The whole journey is life-changing for everyone involved, and we were that upstream that we really needed to think of our work differently. Mm-hmm. Oh, so these are some examples. Oh, the point of that was we were public-facing, and as perhaps you know, if you go out into social media and others, you get feedback right away. It's a living laboratory, good or bad. And these are what people have been saying. It's hard to see, but
he didn't put the negative stuff. You're good.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for simplifying this topic. The first season, it was practical, easy to listen to. It's essential listening for people with a serious illness and their families. This one is from the bottom right, is from a healthcare provider. It changed my perspective of how I approach my patients and families with a serious illness, that they could talk about this earlier, this idea of a palliative care without the labels. And that's not to say later on that they can use the labels. It's just to get the opening for it. This is on the, Twitter, et cetera. Catherine Mannix is the top left, talks about giving power back to the patients. People talk about they want to take charge. They asked this question for the first time. It was very powerful. It's so hard for me to read here. I guess I need to get my eyes checked again. But you can see some of the quotes. Hopefully you can. But the idea is we've been getting feedback that patients and families are using this, and it is helping them to find a language, to invite themselves to the conversation, because all the other times we've been trying to help teach clinicians to invite the patients to have the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about all the mean things that people say on TikTok about you, but not you, me. But yes, we have been getting lots of good intel about how this is landing with citizens. So when we come back to the original question and the reason why, thank you, Ira, you invited us here today to talk about this idea of a label, a name, what's in a name, our name, palliative, should we be branded, rebranded? While we continue to talk about this, even this morning, there are millions and millions of people who are putting their first step on the healthcare conveyor belt. And they will begin a journey while we continue to debate this. And I worry that they will be deconstructed, dismembered, reduced along the way while we continue to sort this out. I wish it was as simple as answering this question about branding. I worry it's way more complicated. And I wonder if it's time for us as a specialty to begin to relinquish more of the ownership over this very human, incredible care that makes us all feel so good.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you also to Ira for inviting me and that was just so lovely. Yeah, that makes us all feel human. Yeah. I do not have slides. Decided I'm going to talk to you, so I hope that works. I'm going to start with, so as you heard, I'm a nurse and a writer, and February of 2010, I had a column in the New York Times called Snow Day in the Hospital, which was about, we'd had 2 feet of snow, I think, dumped overnight in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, where I live. And I called work, because I knew there were nurses who wouldn't be able to come in, and said, you know, I'm close enough, I can come in if you need me. And they said, yeah, come in. So it was, in the column, I'm sort of thinking back on snow days as a kid. You know, it's like, woo, snow day, no school, just get to hang out. But here I was as the nurse going to work, and 2 of my patients were they were ready to go home. They just couldn't get home because of the snow. But another of my patients needed to go to a hospice, was not going to be able to go that day, but it couldn't get set up for a whole variety of misunderstandings. The family had gotten labeled difficult because they kept hearing contradictory things. They felt like nobody would really help them. And I was able to jump into the breach and find out also the hospice had been told some things that were not true about the patient's condition and frame of mind, and so got everything set up. And like I said, he couldn't leave that day, but the next day he was gonna leave and go to the hospice. So was really glad I went in. And after the column came out, there was a palliative care doctor involved with this whole process. And she said, yeah, Teresa, you just said it, palliative care. It's 2010. And that had never crossed my mind, that bringing the label palliative care, the concept of palliative care, a palliative care clinician into a column would be something that person would then say, wow, thank you for doing that, which was essentially what she was doing. And it really struck me like, oh, wow. Because for me, as a nurse working on a bone marrow transplant floor, the palliative care docs were like saviors, right? I mean, they were the people who came in and they told the truth, and they actually sat and they talked with patients. And to my mind, they were heroes, not this maybe slightly beleaguered profession. And so when Ira asked us to think about what do we think of as palliative care, and what was I trying to communicate to people when I wrote that piece, although it wasn't something I was aware of at the time, but it's always good to reflect. And for me, I felt like palliative care is who you call when the chips are down, when the rubber hits the road, I mean, any dramatic metaphor you want like that, to me, that's palliative care. And that's because I worked with a group of oncologists, unfortunately, who just had a really, really hard time telling the truth to patients. And, you know, bone marrow transplant at that time, I mean, a third of the people made it past a year. I mean, the statistics are a lot better now. It was rough, you know. It's a hard treatment for a very serious and bad disease. But the statistics of the outcome were not in question, and yet our docs were not good at all, most of them, at facing that reality. So if you think about this question Ira posed at the start, are we motivated by fear? Or actually, I guess Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but are we motivated by fear? Are we motivated by love? And I see palliative care as where fear meets love. And I spoke about this. I gave a talk yesterday quoting Khalil Gibran saying, "Work is love made visible," which I often think of nursing that way, but I also think of palliative care that way. And you have patients who are very afraid, and a lot of times, you know, they know things are not going well. They're afraid to ask what's really going on here, and they're afraid that if they ask, they won't be told the truth, or if they're told the truth, they won't be told the truth in a way that they can handle, that's respectful, that's loving. And so it's very, very complicated, but I really see palliative care that way. It's where fear meets love. But so now I've clearly anchored palliative care with moments where people are actually dying and very close to the end of their lives, right? Which is not how I totally see it. It's just how that's been my reality of working with palliative care clinicians. But so let's broaden that out a little bit. And we've got treatment, right? Treatment for all kinds of things. Treatment for an ingrown toenail, treatment for a broken femur, treatment for stage 4 metastatic cancer, right? All these treatments, whole conveyor belt assembly line healthcare system. And there's some subset of that treatment or connection with that treatment that's going to evoke suffering. There's going to be some kind of suffering connected with that, maybe with the treatment, maybe with the diagnosis. It's suffering that brings people to get health care, right? Pretty much, for the most part. And then there's death, which is, as we said, part of life. It's the end of everything, but well, the end of our time on Earth, yeah, in this state. But so there are all these pieces, right? And I love this idea of the palliative care van, the palliative care truck, that comes and addresses that suffering, right? But not suffering in a narrow sense of, well, we can relieve your pain or we can help you with your vomiting, although those things are very important. But suffering can be physical, it can be emotional, it can have to do with family, it can have to do with, you know, who's going to take care of my dog after I die. I mean, suffering can have so many forms and flavors, and to have a specialty that addresses that is amazing. It really is amazing. And I'll bring in that I am a breast cancer patient. I just had my 5-year scan. I was clear. I'm doing well. Thank you. But Ira is right. Cancer is scary. I mean, I had a very small, very slow-growing, tubular, for any oncology people in the room, tumor. All this is all great for prognosis. I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. So cancer is scary. The thought of dying is scary. I don't think it's bringing palliative care into this question of relieving suffering that is what's scary. Just going to put that out there. And it's not really about the definition, but about the work. And something I often tell nursing students when I talk to them is, they'll say, Teresa, how do we make sense of this crazy, broken healthcare system? And especially because nurses can often kind of feel in a one-down position. We're trained to be the, quote, patient advocate. But then if you're working in a system where your voice is not, people are not always that interested in what you have to say, which can happen, how do you advocate? And I said, the patient is your North Star. Like, if you focus on the patient, you can't go wrong, and it's much, much harder for people not to listen to you. And that's why we're there, right, to care for the patients. And in my experience, again, with palliative care, it was always about the patient as a specialty. The palliative care physicians always saw the patient as the North Star. One thing I will bring up to this question of palliative care and hospice is I did see this happen, and you've probably all seen this too, is a fear of abandonment that comes in, right, with palliative care consults, because again, if you're working in an environment or with physicians or practices that have a very hard time acknowledging that a patient, even though they've been given great care and everything that can be done has been done, that person is not going to survive. They're either not going to survive their disease, or with the way bone marrow transplant was at that time, they're not going to survive the treatment, right? And you get a kind of, okay, well, consult palliative care to talk about goals of care. And this is the wrong way to bring in palliative care, right? And it's abandonment. I mean, not in like the technical legal sense of medical abandonment, but in an emotional sense, this is abandonment. And of course, then people can get a connection in their mind of palliative care, hospice, abandonment. I'm not worth my physician's attention anymore. We say that so-and-so failed chemo. I hate this formulation, I mean, just that so much of the blame goes on the patient, right? Instead of, this regimen didn't work, this regimen failed to treat the disease. I don't even know how that language arose. It's bizarre to me. But so it's great to have palliative care there at the end of life. The problem is not connecting palliative care with hospice. It's the way it's presented to patients as, well, I just don't have time for you anymore. I can't face what's happening to you. I'm not going to be able to sit and have this conversation with you about the fact that you're not going to survive. All these things, and those things are really, really hard. I mean, they are really, really hard. And if you've been someone's doctor for 5 years, for 10 years, that sucks. It does. It's really hard. But it's not fair to the patient or the specialty, but more the patient, to sort of give them to palliative care in that way. And I mean, I also saw situations where oncologists would tell palliative care doctors, well, you can talk about this, but not this, which I think is ethically quite problematic. And so what I'm pinpointing is it's not the field, it's the way other people in healthcare have failed to integrate the field, show respect to the field, really understand what the field can do. It's complicated, to use an overused word, but this is not a simple problem of, well, should we be connected with hospice or not? Is there suffering? Yes, there's suffering when people are not nearing the end of their lives, and there's often suffering when they are nearing the end of their lives. Is there suffering? Are there patients in need? Go where the need is, right? So the last thing I want to talk about is this question of naming, and does palliative care need a new name? And I love Ira's example of no matter what you called it, like if you could call it the Rainbow Program, well, then you have to call it the Unicorn Program or something, right? You could just keep going, leprechauns, like keep going through lists, right? Of sort of one name more ridiculous than the other, when it's actually cancer that's terrifying, or COPD or whatever, is going on with someone. I just happen to have the most experience with oncology. But I firmly believe it's not about the name, and I'm going to give 2 examples for you to think about that. First is the NAACP, which, if you're not an American, I will explain, is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Was founded in 1909 by, among other people, W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells, to be a civil rights organization. And it's still in existence. I had a friend back in my past life in graduate school in English who, before she came to graduate school, had worked many years for the NAACP. And she said people were constantly asking them, and so this was early 90s, right? Constantly asking them, when are you going to change the name? The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We don't say that anymore, right? For good reasons. When are you going to change the name? You got to change this name. When are you going to change the name? And she said, we are not changing the name. And they still haven't changed the name. And now if you're in the US, you hear NAACP, you know what it is. But they haven't changed the name to just an acronym. It is that name. They haven't changed that name. And everyone knows, if you're clued in at all to political issues around race in the US, everyone knows what that organization is, has a tremendous amount of respect, and they had the courage to say, no, we're not changing this name. This is the name we were founded with, this is our mission, this is what we do. It's not about the name, right? And I think if the NAACP can do that, then palliative care can also do that. But I would say second, and this gets into a lot more sort of textual and contextual issues. I've been reading a lot post-COVID about burnout, moral distress, compassion fatigue, and then reading about arguments about whether, I'm sorry for sighing, that's rude. But I find this I'm going to get to Y's side. Is it burnout? Is it moral distress? Is it compassion fatigue? And people arguing about these terms and which one is correct in this situation. And there are clinicians who find the term burnout, they feel like it's used as kind of a judgment against them, like it's blaming. And I don't feel that, but I do respect that. Like if people feel like that label has been used against them and they don't want it for that reason, I think that's very fair. I completely respect that. But this whole idea of arguing about, is it burnout? Is it moral distress? Is it compassion fatigue? Instead of actually talking about the problem, and this is the exact same point the two of you were making, that, so many nurses have quit. There are shortages all over the country. There are physicians leaving. The rate of physician suicide in the United States is, I think, twice the general population. I mean, it's our healthcare system, and I know Canada has, I know from nurses on Twitter that a lot of Canadian nurses are really struggling also. But, these problems are so serious it almost leaves me speechless to think that instead of talking about these problems and what can we do, we're going to sit and argue about which word is the better label for them. And if that is useful to elicit sort of different threads of the problem or what might be different solutions to the problem, I think that's useful. But to just have a sort of abstract intellectual argument And if there's someone in the room who has like a really, profound reason why, no, it is important to find the right term. I mean, I'm interested in that, but I'm not just going to categorically rule that out. But in general, I would say to spend time sort of having an intellectual argument about which is the best phrase rather than what are we going to do about this? I mean, this is like an all hands on deck moment, right? And has been for quite a while. And yet, it seems in some ways that this argument about what should we call the problem is a way of having a hard time seeing it. And maybe that gets us back to the start of everything, of palliative care, sort of the question of, for me at least, when I worked with palliative care physicians, what's not being seen here is kind of a level of patient suffering that doesn't fall into the treatment or curative category. And you need someone to see that. You need Ira's triangle, And so that's the thought I want to leave you with is thank you. Thank you for seeing that.
We have some time to talk among ourselves and see where this goes. I want to just point out that all of us have taken up kind of the charge of not only providing the clinical leadership that I think collectively as a field we have done within healthcare, palliative care and hospice, but also have deliberately faced the public, trying, I believe, to provide some cultural leadership that I believe, were charged with doing from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and others. And language is a tool and can be an obstacle to doing that. I mean, back, Balfour Mount, who coined the term palliative care, did so in this city because he realized that the term hospice was not going to play well with French-speaking Quebecers. And that was a brilliant decision. And yet here we are with our organizations having both in their names often. And where we are now is that even palliative care has become really a problem. And it feels to me, as I travel and talk to our colleagues, that some of us seem like subtly embarrassed about our field, about what we do. And it's so strange because, the colorectal surgeons call themselves what they do. It's right there in the name, right? They don't call themselves the cheeky bum specialists. I mean, it's right there. What is, what's our issue? So I just want to read these 4 questions again, and then I will let any of you speak. Question 1, what do you want your audiences to think about and feel about palliative care? What is our brand, or do we have one? Should we have one? Should we let go of the term palliative care? And if so, should we go to comfort care or supportive care or the unicorn program or whatever? And should we avoid associating palliative care with hospice and with dying, with end-of-life care? Any of you want to take any of those on?
I mean, I can just start and kick us off, but the thinking and the feeling, I think what we wasn't so explicit in our talk, but it is this idea of people feel in the dark along their journey, the whole journey, at the beginning, all the way through, not just at the end. And we want people to feel like good care allows them to be in the know, to be in control, to be recognized, to have choices. And I think palliative care absolutely does all of those things, but so too do other healthcare professionals. And our brand, and I don't think it's the only brand, I'm not sure we need a tagline, so to speak, but it is this idea of hoping for the best and planning for the rest, and walking two roads. it really has been something that came up early in our 7 years of talking about this, that has stayed true because people do want hope, and I think palliative care does offer hope. It's just a different kind. Hope evolves. We're hoping changing what you're hoping for. So I don't think saying that is inconsistent with what I know from the experts in palliative care, but I think it's similar, and I don't think we should change the name. I mean, it has again, it won't change the issue. That's not the issue. Patients and families don't really care. They want good care. They don't want to be scared. They want to be in the know. They want the best care possible, but they also want to feel safe as they can. And there comes a point where there's nothing. They will die. We will all die, but we don't have to put that as our door shingle.
Sammy, can I follow up for you? Because you've made the case both in this talk and I know in our private conversations that you are starting to feel like the specialty and needing to be consulted and added on can be a barrier in and of itself, I think. And you want to, I don't want to state this for you, but disseminate our knowledge, attitudes, and skills throughout healthcare so that there is a genuine continuity of care. I assume you still think that there's some level of specialty needs that would be useful, and if so, what would you call it?
Definitely. Ira, I absolutely think that there's an important role that we play as a specialty, especially right now, where we haven't really been successful at integrating and embedding palliative care in the curriculum of all healthcare providers. And so while we still have droves and droves of people graduating without the skill set, of course we need our specialty. But what I don't think is that our specialty needs to continue to do all the work that we've been doing, and that's part of the problem. We're enabling a system to think they can pass the baton to us. And so we're needed right now because no one else is doing it. I mean, I think there are pieces of a palliative approach, they just don't label it that way. But until we fix that part of it, the education, we're the best that people have, and we are good at what we do. And because it feels so good to provide it, I worry we're not getting to that other part, which is relinquishing some of this ownership, like I said, so that a person who is diagnosed, who interfaces with any nurse or any doctor, is not at the mercy of their lack of skill, lack of education. So it is the right of patients and families to get this care from everyone and not just us. And so this is why I feel part of the problem, because I continue to do it and do it and do it. And I want to create a succession plan for our field. I think that we'll always be needed in a certain way, but not like this. We're just doing all the care. We need to evolve into mentors, coaches, teachers. We have faculty, nurses, and doctors, and social workers, OTs, all these faculty healthcare educators, and they need faculty development from us so that their learners can see a palliative approach role modeled by them and not have to come and do a palliative care elective like it's some different kind of care that they just stumbled upon serendipitously. I did palliative care in family medicine as an elective, because I was avoiding internal medicine. And so it was serendipitous that I ended up getting some training in palliative care and fell in love. And that's the other thing, is that when residents come and spend time with us after being trained for years, they say, "This is why I went into medicine. It's been washed from me, and I identify with this care. I think I'm going to become a palliative care doctor." Everyone wants to become a palliative care doctor after they taste it. I'm just speaking from a physician's perspective. But you can feel that care. You can remember why you went into medicine if you see it and you practice it your entire career, no matter what you choose to do. And so That's my thought. I'm not sure I answered your question, but thank you for giving me this microphone so that I could say that.
Somehow I had a sense you had things to say. You have all invested a lot in facing the public. You do so every day. By the way, Dr. Sammy Winemaker has a fabulous Twitter feed. If you haven't followed her, follow her. It's really, really, really good. I'm not just saying that. And Teresa Brown just published another book, Healing, about her own journey living with cancer. And again, very vulnerable. This takes a lot of energy and a lot of, investment to do so. I guess I'd like to ask you kind of, what motivates you to face the public? I think you, Teresa and Hsien, you said it was your frustration, and boy, I relate to that. I guess that's my own answer, but Teresa, do you want to take this first?
Thank you for mentioning the book. The book came out in April. It's called Healing When a Nurse Becomes a Patient, and I'd worked inpatient, outpatient oncology, and then home hospice. And when I was diagnosed, right down to, so I had a follow-up mammogram and an ultrasound as part of a study, doing ultrasound with mammography. And they said, we see a mass, and I could tell you the whole story, but I couldn't stop crying. And they just put me back in the hallway with all the other women waiting for their mammograms. And, so I'm sitting there, and I wasn't like dramatically sobbing, but I couldn't stop crying. And just knowing that I'm upsetting every single woman who's there, right? And feeling so exposed, and it was horrible. Really, really horrible. And that was the start. And what I found throughout my treatment, and again, my treatment should have been a slam dunk, right? Like, they should have this down, which I think clinically they do, but the communication, the empathy, the compassion was not there at all. And I was so stunned by that. And then I started to look back on times as a nurse when, there'd been what we might call a glitch, right? Oh, there was a glitch. And I thought, well, big picture, this guy is going to get his chemo, this discharge is going to happen. And I realized when I was a patient, these are not glitches. Like, these are seminal moments when you begin to doubt the people caring for you. You feel like you can't trust them. That's how I felt. And so I wrote the book to reflect on that. And it goes back and forth from me thinking about my treatment to being a nurse, because that's really how my thinking was going. And it was a hard book to write. And then it was a really hard book to promote, because I just had to keep telling the story over and over again about being diagnosed. And I'm very proud of the book. But yeah, it was difficult, but I felt like it was so important to get out that message that our care is not compassionate. But to make sure to say this is not about individuals, it's about the system we've created that puts so much pressure on people. This horrible word, throughput, which I despise. And, are we monetizing this? What are people incentivized to do? Everything's about money, and nothing is really about care. What does care mean? So, yeah, that's a long answer, but that's.
So I think we've done our job. I hope that we've invited you all to continue to think about and discuss this. And I hope the discussions are lively, and I hope they do occur over good food and strong drink. I think we have to get the words right because we have a culture that is acting out of fear, and we want to promote a sense of love for one another, for the people we serve, love in the world. And I think as a field, we have succeeded. You know, we're standing on a two-legged stool currently. We have succeeded in showing that we can not just make care better, we have shown that we can make care much better. We have shown that it is feasible, that it is affordable to provide much better care. But what's lacking is that demand from the consumers or from the public. They instead avoid us out of fear. And if we can communicate well and express what we actually have to offer, then I think our stool will have that third leg, and we will be able to do our job more effectively to reach more people with better care. I just leave you with that. I want to thank you all for the work you've put in and the wonderful presentations, and thank you all for attending, and I wish you good conversations over food and drink. Thank you.